Dakota Territory, winter 1876. The Great Plains stretch without end, white vast, silent as a held breath. No trees, no shelter, just frozen earth beneath a sky so wide it feels like a warning. Somewhere in that emptiness, a thin thread of smoke rises from a hillside. Just one. Every other chimney in the settlement is belching black against the gray, burning hard, burning desperate, the way you burn when the walls around you are losing the fight. But this single thread rises slow, steady, unhurried, like something that doesn't need to fight at all. Inside that hillside carved 8 feet into frozen earth, the temperature holds at 63 degrees. Outside 42 below zero. A boy built this, 16 years old, alone, with $27 in a drawing his dead mother left him. And somewhere in the dark above his head, the worst blizzard in a decade is just getting started. Part 1, they said he wouldn't last until January. The cold came in like a verdict. Not slowly, not with warning. It arrived on the night of December 29th, 1876. The way bad news always arrives all at once, without apology, without mercy. Outside, the thermometer read 42 below zero. The wind didn't sound like wind. It sounded like the earth itself had decided it was done being patient. Inside, the dugout carved 8 feet into the south-facing hillside above the Missouri River bottomlands. A 16-year-old boy named Eli Lindquist sat on a wooden stool and listened to the world try to kill him. It wasn't succeeding. The temperature inside held at 63 degrees. Copper's 70 pounds of golden retriever with a coat the color of a penny in sunlight lay pressed against Eli's left leg, heavy and warm, and absolutely certain that everything was fine. Because dogs know things. They feel things through the floor, through the earth, through the deep, steady pulse of ground that hasn't changed temperature in 1,000 years. Copper wasn't afraid, so Eli decided not to be either. He pressed his back against the earthen wall, felt the warmth seep through his coat, listened to the basso profundo scream of the blizzard above his head, a sound like freight trains, like God clearing his throat, like every winter in Dakota Territory, arriving at once, and thought about his mother. Astrid Lindquist had been dead for 11 weeks, and she had known. She had known this moment was coming. She had known it years before it arrived. But that part of the story comes later. First, 51 days earlier. First, the beginning. November 8th, 1876. 3 miles south of what would become Yankton. A boy, a dog, a cardboard suitcase held closed with a length of rope, and $310 in paper money folded tight inside a Swedish Bible that smelled like his mother's hands. That's all he had. That was everything. Eli Lindquist stepped off the freight wagon at the edge of the settlement and stood in the road and looked at the land the way you look at something you're not sure you deserve. Flat, brown, enormous. The sky so wide it felt like a threat. Copper sat next to him and panted. Because it was November and already cold, and Copper was panting anyway because Copper operated on a separate emotional timeline from everyone else. Cheerful in the freezing cold, cheerful in the mud, cheerful in the dark. Eli had found this annoying exactly once back in Minnesota. Now he found it necessary. The settlement was a scattered thing. A dozen timber frame houses, a general store with a porch that leaned slightly to the left, a church under construction, a land office with a handwritten sign that said claims Eli County territorial law applies. He walked toward it. Copper walked next to him like he owned the street. The clerk at the land office was a thin man named Dobbs, who had the permanent expression of someone who had recently smelled something unpleasant. Name, Dobbs said. E. Lindquist. Dobbs wrote it down without looking up. Age, 18. A pause. Dobbs looked up then. Looked at Eli the way adults look at teenagers who have just lied about something, that slow evaluating look that says, I know, but I'm deciding whether it matters. Eli looked back steadily. Copper sat down next to Eli and yawned enormously. The yawn broke something in the room. Dobbs almost smiled. Almost. Quarter section, Dobbs said. South Hillside. You know what you're doing out there? Yes, Eli said. He didn't know. Not entirely, not yet. But he had his mother's drawings and his father's tools and $310 and a dog who believed without reservation that things were going to work out. That had to be enough, because it was all there was. Chatinda. He chose the south-facing hillside because the drawings said to. Not his drawings. hers. Astrid Lindqvist had died of typhoid fever on September 14, 1876, in a rented room above a blacksmith shop in Mankato, Minnesota. She'd been 38 years old. She'd been, as far as Eli was concerned, the only person in the world who had ever truly understood how things worked. Not book things, not schoolroom things, real things, material things, the way water moved through earth, the way heat behaved in mass, the way a hillside could hold warmth the same way a hand holds warmth, not because it generates it, but because it keeps it. Her father, Eli's grandfather, Halvard, who Eli had never met, had built into hillsides in Dalarna, Sweden, had survived 3 winters in earth-sheltered structures while his neighbors burned through firewood and froze anyway. Astrid had watched him as a girl, had asked questions, had drawn pictures in the margins of her school books. She'd kept drawing, for years, quietly, the way you keep something you suspect you're going to need. Roland Voss had not known about the drawings. Roland Voss had not known about the money either. Roland Voss, Eli's stepfather, married to Astrid for 2 years and 3 months, a man who wore good boots and had soft hands, and had never in his life built anything that lasted, had been very interested in the Bible. He'd looked for money in it the night after the funeral. He hadn't found it, because Astrid had sewn the folded bills into the spine during the last week she was able to sit upright, had sewn them there with the same quiet precision she brought to everything she decided mattered. Roland had found the Bible empty and grown cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. 2 weeks after the funeral, he'd sat Eli down at the kitchen table. "My wife's sister is coming from Milwaukee," Roland said. He didn't say Astrid's name. He hadn't said it once since she died. "She'll need the room." Eli had looked at him. "You're 16, Roland said. "That's old enough." "Old enough for what?" "To make your own way." So that was that. Eli had taken the Bible. Roland hadn't stopped him, didn't know about the spine and his father's wooden tool chest and copper, who had been Astrid's dog and was now nobody's dog except his own, and he had walked out the door on a Tuesday morning in October and not looked back. He'd wanted to look back. He hadn't, because looking back was a thing you did when you weren't sure you were going in the right direction. And Eli was sure. He didn't know why he was sure, but he was. Later he would understand that the certainty had come from somewhere specific. From a Sunday afternoon in August, when Astrid was still sick, but not yet desperate, when she'd called him to her bedside and pressed something into his hand. A small, flat object wrapped in cloth. "Don't open this yet," she'd said. Her voice had already started to thin by then, like paper held up to light. "When?" he'd asked. "You'll know," she said. He'd carried it for 2 months. Through the funeral, through Roland's cold announcement, through the freight wagon and the wide blank sky and the settlement and Dobbs and his almost smile. He opened it on the first night in his tent. Inside the cloth, a piece of folded paper. Her handwriting, Swedish on one side, English on the other, because she'd written it twice. She'd written it in both languages because she wanted to be absolutely certain he could read it, regardless of which version of himself he'd become by then. The Swedish side first. A sketch, precise lines, a hillside in cross-section, a structure dug 8 feet in, dimensions noted in her careful hand, labels for the roof timbers, the air gap, the chimney angle, the floor pitch, notes about thermal mass, notes about drainage, notes about which direction the entrance should face. Everything. She'd put everything in there. And at the bottom of the sketch in Swedish, "Your grandfather survived 3 winters with this. I never told you because I hoped you wouldn't need it. If you're reading this, I was wrong to hope." Then the English side. Shorter. Just 3 sentences. "You will be cold. You will be afraid. The earth will hold you the way I cannot anymore trust it. Trust yourself, I already do." Eli read it twice. Then he folded the paper and put it in his chest pocket against his sternum. He never put it anywhere else. The south-facing hillside. He'd walked the land for 2 days before he chose it. Copper had walked with him, nose down, reading the ground the way dogs read the ground, with the absolute authority of a creature that cannot be wrong about what it smells. The hillside was perfect, gradual enough to excavate, steep enough to provide thermal mass on 3 sides. South-facing, which meant winter sun on the entrance and natural light in the darkest months. Missouri River bottomlands below, which meant protected air on the coldest nights. Other homesteaders in the area had built on flat ground. Timber frame houses standing exposed to every wind that came howling down from Canada. Some had built sod houses, but built them the way they'd built timber houses. Four walls standing free, trying to hold back the weather through sheer stubbornness. Eli looked at those houses and thought, that's the wrong argument. You don't argue with winter. You don't stand in front of it and insist. You work with what's already there. You use the earth that's already warm. You stop fighting the cold and start letting the ground do what it's been doing for 10,000 years. His mother had understood this. He was beginning to. The third day after he'd filed his claim, Eli was measuring the hillside with a length of rope and a plumb line when he heard boots on frozen ground behind him. Copper's ears went up, but his tail went up too, so not a threat. The man who appeared at the edge of Eli's stake survey line was about 35 years old, with a dark beard going gray at the jaw and the kind of eyes that noticed everything. He carried a leather notebook and wore a coat that had been good quality once, before a lot of Dakota winters had gotten to it. He stopped at the survey stake and looked at Eli's rope measurements, then at the hillside, then at the angle marks Eli had scratched into the frozen ground. He didn't say hello. He said, "What are you calculating?" Eli straightened. "Roof angle and chimney draft ratio." The man looked at the hillside again, then back at Eli. Something shifted in his expression, not condescension, which Eli had been expecting. Something else, something closer to interest. "You're building into the hill." "Yes." "Horizontal or angled entry?" "Angled, 6 degrees for drainage." The man opened his notebook, took out a pencil, started writing. Eli watched him write. "Who are you?" Eli asked. "Ernst Halverson. I teach at the settlement school." He didn't look up from the notebook. "Who taught you about drainage angles?" "My mother." Ernst stopped writing, looked up. "Where is she?" "Dead," Eli said. "September." A pause, not uncomfortable, just honest. Ernst gave it the moment it deserved. "I'm sorry," he said, and he meant it. You could tell when people meant it. "She left me drawings," Eli said, "of the structure, everything I need to build it. May I see them?" Eli considered this for a moment. Then he pulled the folded paper from his chest pocket carefully, because the paper was already showing wear at the creases, and held it out. Ernst took it with both hands. Read it. Studied the sketch for a long time. Copper came over and sniffed Ernst's boot. Decided he was acceptable. Sat down next to him. "Your mother understood thermal mass," Ernst said finally. "I don't know that word. It's what the Earth does. The ground 6 feet down stays at roughly 52 degrees year-round. Doesn't matter if it's January or July. The Earth has so much mass that it barely changes temperature." He handed the paper back. "She designed a structure that uses that. You add a little heat in winter, you're comfortable. You remove a little heat in summer, same thing. Meanwhile, everyone else is trying to heat air inside a wooden box that leaks heat in every direction." Eli folded the paper, put it back against his sternum. "Will it work?" he asked. Ernst looked at the hillside, at the sketch he'd copied into his notebook, at Copper, who was now sitting on his foot. "If you manage moisture and ventilation correctly," Ernst said. "Yes, it should work beautifully." He paused. "But you're 16 years old, and you're alone out here, and winter is coming fast. The engineering is sound. The human variables are the risk." "I'll manage the human variables," Eli said. Ernst looked at him for a long moment. "I believe you," he said, and that was the beginning of something. Two people who understood how things worked finding each other at the edge of winter in a place where very few people understood anything except stubbornness. Ernst came back the next day, and the day after. He didn't call it mentorship. Eli didn't call it anything. It was just two people looking at the same problem, talking about it, one of them knowing the science, one of them knowing the drawings. Together, they filled in what the other didn't have. 9 days after he filed his claim, Eli hired Wolf and Peter Grabner, brothers, 17 and 15 respectively, sons of a German farming family with too many sons and not enough land, which was the situation of approximately 1/3 of the families in the settlement, 50 cents a day each. Wolf thought Eli was crazy. Peter thought Eli was interesting, which was worse because interesting people required actual engagement. "You want to live in the ground," Wolf said on the first morning, standing at the base of the hillside with a pickaxe and a skeptical expression. "Like a mole." Like a person who wants to stay warm, Eli said. My cousin tried something like this in Ohio. The ceiling fell on his dog. Copper looked up from where he'd been investigating a frozen rabbit burrow. My roof won't fall, Eli said. That's what my cousin said. How thick were his support timbers? Wolf blinked. I don't know. Mine are 8 inches in diameter. Lodgepole pine, spaced 30 inches apart. Eli looked at him. Your cousin's ceiling fell because of insufficient load distribution. Mine won't. Wolf stared at him. Peter had already started digging. Fine, Wolf said, but I'm not going in if it looks unstable. It won't look unstable, Eli said, because it won't be unstable. And if it is, then you can say you told me so. Wolf picked up his pickaxe, started digging. He never got to say he told Eli so. 21 days, that's how long it took. The excavation first, 8 feet back into the hillside, then down 3 more. 12 feet wide, 16 feet deep. 9 feet of headroom at the front where the sod wall would rise. The back 3/4 sitting under 4 feet of hillside, invisible from above thermal mass pressing in from 3 sides. The floor graded, 1 inch of drop for every 6 feet front to back. Imperceptible to walk on. Sufficient to carry water away from the living space. Eli had calculated it from the drawings and then recalculated it twice because his mother's notation in the margin said check this twice. He checked it twice. The sod bricks next. Dakota sod was extraordinary material root systems, woven tight by decades of bluestem and buffalo grass holding together like reinforced earth. They cut 247 bricks, each one 36 inches long, 12 inches wide, 6 inches thick. Each one 45 pounds. Wolf's arms by the end of the second week had taken on the quality of rope. Peter had stopped complaining and started asking questions. About the air gap. About why 2 separate walls were better than 1 thick one. About the chimney angle. Dead air space, Eli explained, laying the interior wall course by course. Air is a terrible conductor of heat. 2 feet of still air between these walls is worth more than 4 feet of solid earth. Peter wrote that down in the dirt with a stick. Who told you that? My mother. Peter looked at the hillside, at the structure taking shape, at the careful courses of sod rising in 2 parallel walls with a 2-foot gap between them. She must have been something, he said. Eli kept working. She was, he said. The roof cost him $90, nearly half his budget. 6 lodgepole pine timbers, 8 inches in diameter, freighted from the Black Hills. The price was what it was, and he paid it without flinching because his mother's drawings had a note next to the roof section that said, "Do not economize here." He didn't economize. Willow branches across the timbers, $8 of canvas laid over that. Then 2 layers of sod, 14 inches thick, 3 tons of earth pressing down, and the timbers didn't even creak. The chimney, a cast iron stove in the back corner, $23, the best investment remaining in his budget. Stovepipe angled into the hillside at 30 degrees. A clay-lined tunnel running 9 feet through earth before emerging 12 feet above the roofline. The angle created natural draft. The clay absorbed heat and released it slowly, warming the earth around the pipe, warming the dugout from the inside out. Nothing wasted. 2 windows salvaged from a settler who'd given up and headed back east, $12 for both set deep into the sod walls. The 2-foot wall thickness created natural light wells. Not much light, but some. Enough. The door cottonwood planks 4 inches thick, hinged with leather straps from the fort. It opened inward, because snow could block an outward opening door and trap a person inside. Small detail. The kind of detail that looked like common sense but was actually the difference between surviving a blizzard and not. Floor-packed earth mixed with wood ash and water tamped hard, swept with fine sand. Free. Permanent. Would never rot. Total cost for the structure itself, $27, plus $90 for the roof timbers, plus $12 for the windows, plus Wolf and Peter's wages. December 4th, 1876, moving in day, which was just Eli carrying a suitcase through the door and setting it down and standing in the middle of the space and looking around. 192 square feet, a rope bed in the corner with a straw mattress, a small table, 2 chairs Wolf had helped him build from salvage wood, shelves cut directly into the back earthen wall, a trunk for his clothes. The stove radiating the gentle, even heat of a small fire just started. Copper walked in behind him, nose working, investigated every corner, found the spot nearest the stove, the warmest corner, the one where the clay-lined chimney tunnel ran closest to the surface, and lay down. Settled. Closed his eyes. Eli sat on the edge of the bed and took his mother's paper from his chest pocket and read it again. Both sides, the sketch, the dimensions, the 3 sentences. You will be cold. You will be afraid. The earth will hold you the way I cannot anymore. He folded it, put it back. He was not cold. He was not afraid. He wasn't sure what he was exactly. Somewhere on the far side of grief, there was a territory he didn't have a name for. Yet a place that felt like quiet, felt like work, felt like the satisfaction of something built correctly. His mother had drawn this space, and he had built it. It existed because she had thought to imagine it. It would keep him alive because she had known years in advance what he would need. He looked around at the earthen walls, the solid roof, the windows gathering what thin December light there was. He understood for the first time what it meant to be held by something larger than yourself. The earth held at 51 degrees with no fire at all. A small fire in the morning and evening brought it to 62. He would use 6 pounds of wood a day, maybe 7. The established homesteaders in the settlement, the ones who had told him repeatedly and with great confidence that he would fail, were burning 30 to 40. The first skeptic had arrived before the walls were even finished. Gunnar Folvik, 46 years old, Norwegian from a farming family outside Bergen, had been in Dakota Territory for 4 years, had lost one house to prairie fire, rebuilt, lost a neighbor to the second winter, rebuilt his own grief into something that looked like certainty. He was a big man, hands like shovels, a beard that moved when the wind moved. He spoke English the way you speak a language you learn from a dictionary, correctly, carefully, with the cadence of someone who has translated every word before saying it. He rode up on the 3rd day of construction, looked at the excavated hillside, at Wolf and Peter moving sod bricks, at Eli marking courses on the front wall with a length of twine, dismounted, crossed his arms. "You're building down," he said. "Into the hill," Eli said. "Yes." "The cold, it comes up from the ground." Gunnar said it with the finality of a man stating a law of nature. "You will be in a hole, collecting all the cold. You will freeze like a root vegetable in a cellar." "The earth stays warmer than the air," Eli said. "The earth in Dakota is cold." Gunnar looked at him. "Everything in Dakota is cold. You need thick walls and a good stove and a woodpile that can last the winter. You need what every man needs." "I'll use 1/5 of the wood you use," Eli said. Gunnar looked at him the way adults look at children who have said something both confident and wrong. "How old are you?" 16. "When I was 16, I also thought I knew things." Gunnar put his hat back on. "Come to my house when you're cold enough. We'll have space for you." He rode away. He never made that offer again. Dietrich Hamann came the following day. 51 years old, German, had been a mason in Hamburg for 20 years before emigrating. Had built his family a stone house in the settlement, mortared tight plumb walls, good foundation, and considered it the finest structure within 20 miles. It had cost him 8 months of work and $370. He was not wrong to be proud of it. He was also freezing in it, but he didn't know that yet. He stood at the edge of the excavation and listed in order every technical reason the dugout would fail. Moisture, mold, inadequate ventilation, structural load distribution, chimney draft in below-grade construction, the weight of saturated sod in a spring thaw pressing on roof timbers not designed for variable load. Each point was technically valid. Each point had an answer. Eli gave each answer. Floor pitch for drainage, the double wall air gap for moisture control, the chimney tunnel angle for draft, the lodgepole pine timbers rated for the load. Dietrich listened to each answer with the expression of a craftsman watching an apprentice explain something the craftsman already knows. "You've calculated the timber load," Dietrich said. "Yes." "Show me." Eli showed him. The calculations his mother had sketched in the margin of the drawing, which he'd extended and verified with Ernst's help. Dietrich studied them for a long time. "This is correct," he said finally. "I know. But the drainage pitch." Dietrich crouched, looked at the floor grade. 1 inch and 6 feet. That's almost nothing. "It's sufficient," Eli said. "How do you know?" "I poured water on the far corner and timed it to the entrance." Dietrich looked up at him. You tested it. Yes. Another long look, the kind of look that wasn't quite hostility and wasn't quite respect, and was something uncomfortable in between. I was apprenticed for 4 years to learn what I know, Dietrich said quietly. I know, Eli said. Not unkind, just honest. And you think you can learn it in 3 weeks from a sketch. I think my mother already learned it, Eli said. I'm just building what she designed. Dietrich stood, brushed dirt from his coat. Pride before a fall, he said. Maybe, Eli said. Or maybe just a warm house. Dietrich left. Cecilia Pratt arrived on the 5th day of construction, and she was different from the others. 69 years old, from Massachusetts originally. Had come west with her husband in 1869, lost him to a riding accident in 1873, and had spent the 3 years since running their farm alone with a precision that impressed everyone who understood farming and unnerved everyone who thought widows were supposed to need help. She was the most influential person in the settlement, not because she had the most money, though she had considerable money, because she had the most sense, and people who have the most sense in a small community become over time the ones everyone watches. She did not come to argue. She came because Copper had trotted up to the edge of her property that morning, wagging his tail with the serene confidence of a dog who has never once been turned away from anything, and she had followed him back. She stood at the excavation edge and watched for a while without speaking. Copper sat next to her. This is ambitious, she said finally. Yes, ma'am, Eli said. You're the Lindqvist boy, filed the South Hillside claim. E. Lindqvist, yes. Your mother? Dead September. Cecilia looked at the structure taking shape, at the careful double-wall construction, at the angle of the entrance which faced south and slightly east, catching morning light. Who designed this? She asked. She did, Eli said. Cecilia looked at him then. Really looked. The way older women look at young people when they're trying to understand not just what they're doing, but who they're going to become. You have somewhere to go if this doesn't work, she said. It'll work, Eli said. I said if. Eli looked at her steadily. I have Ernst Halverson checking my calculations. Ernst is a good man, Cecilia said. He smart, honest. A pause. But smart and honest don't keep you warm if your chimney fails. I know how to keep a chimney clear, Eli said. You know how to keep warm when you're sick. He didn't answer. You know how to keep warm when the wood runs out before February, when you're snowed in for a week and can't get to the settlement, when you're 16 years old and something goes wrong that your mother's drawings didn't account for. Still no answer. Cecilia looked at him a moment longer. I have a room, she said. Good stove, meals twice a day. I need someone reliable for winter chores. The pay would be room and board plus $2 a week. Eli looked at the excavation, at the sod walls rising, at Wolf, who had stopped working and was watching this conversation with the focused interest of someone who suspects it might be about to get interesting. Thank you, Eli said. No. Cecilia's expression didn't change. You're certain? Yes, ma'am. Why? And here was the moment. Here was the thing he hadn't said to Gunnar Folvik or Dietrich Hamann because it wasn't the right answer for them. But Cecilia Pratt was asking a different question. She wasn't asking about engineering. She was asking about something else. Because my mother built this, Eli said. She built it before she died in her head on paper in a sketch she kept for years, waiting for the day I'd need it. She spent that time, whatever time she had when she was sick, making sure I had what I needed. He paused. If I walk away from this and go work for someone else's warm stove, then everything she planned for is wasted. Cecilia said nothing. I'm not staying out of stubbornness, Eli said. I'm staying because she was right, and I intend to prove it. The silence stretched. Copper looked up at Cecilia, wagged his tail twice, slowly. Cecilia looked down at the dog, then back at Eli. If you need anything, she said, come to me before you need it badly enough that it becomes a crisis. She turned and walked back toward her property. She did not tell him he'd fail. It was the first time anyone hadn't. December 4th, moving in. December 8th, the first real cold snap. 6 degrees below zero 3 nights running. Eli woke the first morning to a dugout that measured 58 degrees. No fire. He added wood small pieces, slow burn, and brought it to 64. That warmth held for 5 hours. Outside, he could see Gunnar at his timber frame house. Through the wavering air, the man had been up since 3 in the morning feeding the stove, Eli would learn later. His woodpile was visibly smaller each day. Dietrich's children, Eli heard from Peter, were sleeping in coats. Eli put on one extra layer and went about his work. The temperature in the dugout never dropped below 57 even at the coldest hours before dawn. He was using 6 pounds of wood a day. Gunnar was burning 35. On the third day of the cold snap, Eli was splitting kindling outside in his wool sweater. Just the sweater, no coat, because it wasn't cold enough for the coat when he heard hoofbeats. He looked up. Gunnar Folvik was riding toward him. The man's face was raw, chapped red at the cheeks and jaw. His eyes had the ringed, exhausted look of someone who hadn't slept properly in 3 nights. He pulled his horse to a stop, looked at Eli in his sweater, looked at the thin thread of smoke rising from the hillside chimney. "How much wood are you burning?" he said. Not a question. More like a man speaking aloud something he was trying to make himself believe. 6 pounds a day, Eli said. A pause. "That's not possible." "That's what I'm using." Gunnar looked at the chimney smoke. His own chimney, visible in the distance, was belching like a forge. He could see it from here. The comparison was unmistakable. He dismounted. "Show me," he said. Eli opened the door. The warmth hit Gunnar immediately. Not fierce, not the burning dryness of a stove running hard to fight the cold. Something else. A gentle, encompassing warmth that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. From the walls, from the floor, from the air itself. Everything was the same temperature. No cold spots near the windows, no drafts, no patches of frost climbing the interior walls. Gunnar walked to the back wall, pressed his palm against it, warm, like skin. He stood there with his hand against the earthen wall and didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he turned and looked at Copper, who had raised his head and was watching this with the mild interest of a creature who has already decided the outcome. "The dog," Gunnar said. "He's comfortable." "He always is," Eli said. Another long pause. "My grandfather," Gunnar said slowly, in Norway. "He built into hillsides. I visited him as a boy." He shook his head. "I forgot. We come to a new land, and we think we must do it the new way. The modern way. We forget what our grandparents knew because knowing it would mean admitting they knew more than we do." He turned and looked at Eli. "I was wrong," he said, quietly, simply. "I told you it wouldn't work. I was wrong." "You couldn't have known," Eli said. "I should have remembered." Gunnar put his hat back on. He didn't tell anyone what he'd seen that day. Pride is a powerful force, sometimes more powerful than cold. But when he rode away, he didn't predict Eli's failure again. And in the dugout, Copper put his head back down and sighed contentedly, the long, slow sigh of a dog who has been right about everything from the beginning and is at peace with that. The earth held at 51 degrees with no fire. With a small fire, 63. Outside, December pressed in like a promise. The real test was still coming, but the boy had built something that worked. And somewhere in the frozen ground beneath his feet, at a depth of 6 feet in the dark, in the warmth and the ancient stillness, the earth held. Just as his mother had always known it would. Part 2. When the earth holds warmer than people do. December was not interested in mercy. It never had been. Not in Dakota Territory, not in 1876, not for anyone. December arrived the way it always arrived on the northern plains, without announcement, without apology, with the absolute conviction of something that has been doing this for 10,000 years and intends to keep doing it. The cold snap of early December had been a warning. What came after was the actual message. Eli had been in the dugout for 11 days when the letter arrived. Not delivered to the dugout. There was no delivery to the dugout. He picked it up at the settlement post office, a shelf at the back of the general store, where Dobbs sorted mail on Tuesday afternoons with the enthusiasm of a man serving a sentence. The envelope was addressed to E. Linkvist, Dakota Territory, Homestead, Claim 7 South. The return address was a law office in Yankton. Eli stood in the general store and looked at that envelope for a long moment. Copper sat next to him and looked at the envelope too. Neither of them liked it. He opened it outside in the cold because he didn't want Dobbs watching his face. 3 paragraphs, legal language, dense and deliberate the way legal language is always dense and deliberate, designed to make you feel small and confused and in the wrong regardless of whether you are. The substance Roland Voss, represented by one Mr. Cresswell of Yankton, was challenging the homestead claim on the grounds that E. Linkfist had been a minor without legal guardianship at the time of filing. The claim, per Cresswell's reading of territorial law, was therefore void. A hearing had been scheduled before the Yankton Land Board. February 3, 1877. Eli read it twice. Then he folded it carefully, put it in his coat pocket. Copper pressed against his leg. So that was what Roland wanted. Not Eli. Roland had never wanted Eli. Had made that abundantly clear the Tuesday morning he'd sat across the kitchen table and explained that his wife's sister needed a room. What Roland wanted was the quarter section, the south-facing hillside above the Missouri bottomlands that Eli had chosen because his mother's drawing said to. The land that was worth something because of its position, because of its potential, because of the way the river curved below it, and the timber claim potential on the eastern edge. Roland Voss had soft hands and good boots and had never built anything that lasted. But he understood land value, and he had a lawyer. Eli did not have a lawyer. Eli had $23 remaining in his budget after buying the cast-iron stove. He had a dog. He had a school teacher who came by every few days to look at the chimney draft and write things in a notebook. He walked back to the dugout, sat down on the edge of the bed. Copper put his head on Eli's knee. Eli sat there for a while, not thinking, just being in the space, feeling the warmth, the steady, impartial warmth that the earth provided, because that was what earth did. It held temperature, it resisted change, it maintained itself regardless of what happened on the surface above it. He thought about his mother. She had known Roland would do something like this, had known it the way you know weather, not the specific shape of it, but the fact of its coming. Why else had she hidden the money in the Bible spine instead of the household accounts? Why else had she written the letter in 2 languages? She had prepared for Roland. She had prepared for all of it. Eli reached into his coat pocket, took out the Yankton letter, read it again. Then he took out the folded paper from his chest pocket, unfolded it, read her 3 sentences. Trust it. Trust yourself. I already do. He folded it back. He would need Ernst. Ernst Halverson read the letter at his kitchen table that evening, holding it under a lamp, his lips moving slightly the way they did when he was parsing something carefully. Then he set it down. Cresswell, he said. You know him. I know of him. He represents several land interests out of Yankton. He's good at finding technical grounds. Ernst looked at the letter again. This argument has been made before. It hasn't always held. What does that mean? It means there's precedent on both sides. Ernst picked up his own notebook, started writing. The Homestead Act doesn't specify a minimum age with perfect clarity. It says the claimant must be the head of a family or 21 years of age or older. But territorial land boards have previously ruled that a minor who had established physical residency and demonstrated material improvement of the land could maintain a claim under equity principles. It's not settled law, but it's a defensible position. Eli watched him write. That's not a law, Eli said. No, it's an argument, the kind that has worked before and could work again. Ernst looked up. Your dugout is your strongest argument. The physical improvement, the residency, the documented construction. He paused. I'll write to the Yankton Land Office. I'll document everything you've built and everything it's done. Why? Eli said. Ernst looked at him. Why are you doing this? Eli said. Not suspicious, just genuinely asking. You're a school teacher. This isn't your problem. Ernst was quiet for a moment. Because what you've built is correct, he said finally. The engineering is sound, the construction is sound, the reasoning behind it is sound, and I find it very difficult to watch correct things be undone by incorrect ones. He went back to writing. Also, he said without looking up, your mother designed something important. I would like to see it survive long enough to matter. Eli didn't say anything. Copper, who had come along and was now lying under Ernst's table, thumped his tail once against the floor. Roland Voss arrived in the settlement on December 12th. Eli saw him first from the hillside, a figure on horseback riding in from the east road. Heavy coat, good horse. The upright posture of a man who believes his arrival matters. Eli recognized the posture before he recognized the face. His chest did something complicated. Not fear exactly, not quite. Something adjacent to fear, the physical sensation of a problem you have been expecting arriving earlier than you hoped. He kept working. He was patching a section of the exterior sod wall where a small frost crack had developed. A minor thing easily repaired the kind of routine maintenance that came with earth and construction. He kept his hands moving, kept his eyes on the work. Copper watched Roland ride through the settlement below. The dog did not wag his tail. Roland didn't come to the dugout that day, or the next. He went to Dobbs, to the general store, to two other homesteaders whose names Eli didn't learn until later. He was building something, a case, a coalition, an argument. The way men like Roland built things, not with their hands, with words, with leverage, with the slow grinding machinery of legal process. Eli led him, because there was nothing else to do, and because the dugout was warmer than anything Roland Voss had ever built, and Eli intended to be in it when February 3rd arrived. Bam! Cecilia Pratt came by on December 15th. Not because of Roland, not directly. She came because Copper had appeared at the edge of her property again, had simply materialized there, tail moving, eyes bright with the cheerful certainty of a dog who knows exactly what he's doing and is not even slightly embarrassed about it. She followed him back as before, but this time she came inside. Eli held the door. She stepped in and stopped. Just stopped, in the center of the space in the low amber light of the oil lamp, looking around, at the earthen walls, at the shelves carved directly into the back wall, at the curvature of the ceiling where the sod pressed down through the timbers in gentle compression, at the stove radiating its even, unhurried heat, at the Swedish Bible on the shelf, at the paper Astrid's drawing pinned carefully to the wall beside the shelves. Cecilia walked to the drawing, looked at it for a long moment. "Your mother drew this," she said. "Yes. Before she died. Years before. She updated it, I think. The ink is different colors in different places." Cecilia looked at the variations in ink. The older lines, the newer ones. A document built over time. A thing a woman had returned to again and again, refining. "Was your mother a practical woman?" Cecilia said. "The most practical person I've ever known," Eli said. Cecilia was quiet. She sat down in the chair by the stove, the one Eli used in the evenings, and looked at the stove and felt the warmth and was quiet for a while. Copper put his head in her lap. She put her hand on his head without looking down. Automatic. The gesture of someone who has always had dogs and always will. "Roland Voss is telling people you forged your age on the claim filing," she said. Eli kept his face still. "I know. He's also telling people your mother was unstable, that she had ideas that were not sound." Something moved through Eli's chest then. Not quite anger. Hotter than anger, quieter. "She was the soundest person I've ever known," he said. "I believe you," Cecilia said, simply, without qualification. A pause. "I know Ernst is helping you with the legal situation," she said. "Good. Ernst is thorough." She looked at the drawing again. "What can I do?" Eli looked at her. "I thought you wanted me to leave," he said. "I wanted you to be safe," she said. "There's a difference. I was deciding based on what I could see." A pause. "I see more now." She stood up. "What do you need?" she said. Eli thought. "Witnesses," he said. "For the hearing, people who can say the structure is built and standing and working as designed." "I can do that," Cecilia said. "And," he stopped. "And Ernst says any legal argument depends on documented material improvement. I've been keeping notes. Construction dates, material costs, temperature readings. But if someone with standing in this settlement were to independently verify those records..." "I'll verify them," Cecilia said. She was already moving toward the door. "Bring me your records this week. I'll co-sign every page." She stopped at the door, looked back at the drawing. "Your mother raised you right," she said. She left. Copper watched her go, then looked at Eli with an expression that on a human face would have been called satisfaction. December 24th, 1876. Christmas Eve. The settlement was quiet in the way only very cold places are quiet. A deep, particular silence, the sound of temperature pressing down on everything. Eli cooked cornmeal porridge on the stove, added the last of the dried apple slices from his stores. A small luxury, the kind of thing you allow yourself when you're alone at Christmas and you decide that you deserve at least one small thing. Copper sat across from him, which was Copper's standard position at mealtimes, directly across at a distance calculated to be both respectful and persuasive. Not begging, never begging, just present, available, in case. Eli set a small portion of the pork fat aside on a tin plate and put it on the floor. Copper ate it with dignity. They sat together in the lamplight. Eli's hand went to the Bible on the shelf, his mother's Bible. He hadn't opened it since the day he'd counted the money in the spine back in October. He lifted it down now, heavy, worn at the corners. The leather cover had a small stain on the back from some long-ago accident in her kitchen. He opened it. He didn't have a particular passage in mind. He turned pages slowly, feeling the thin paper, reading fragments. Her handwriting in the margins here and there, a word underlined, a date, noted a small cross in pencil beside certain verses. He turned to the Psalms, and there it was, tucked so far into the binding of Psalm 46 that it had been invisible unless you were looking. A folded piece of paper smaller than the drawing, creased from long keeping. He unfolded it. Her handwriting, English only this time, no Swedish, because she had written it for him specifically for the version of him she had imagined existing in the future, reading this at some unknown later moment. Eli, I don't know when you're reading this. I hope it's a quiet night. I hope you're warm. You will be cold. You will be afraid. There will be people who tell you that what you're doing is wrong or foolish or impossible. Some of them will be wrong. Some of them will be right about the wrong thing. They'll see the risk and miss the solution. Listen to all of them. Then do what the drawings say. The earth will hold you the way I cannot anymore. It held your grandfather. It will hold you. This is not faith. This is physics. Trust it. Trust yourself. I already do. I always have. Even before you knew what you were capable of, I knew. That's what mothers are for. Come home when you can. If you can't come home, build one. You already have. Love, Mama. Eli sat very still. Copper got up from across the room, walked to him, stood next to him, pressed his side against Eli's leg with the particular pressure of a dog who knows something is happening and has decided to be present for it. Eli didn't cry, not immediately. He read the letter twice more, folded it, set it on the table. Then he put his face in his hands. Not for long, a minute, maybe two. The kind of grief that doesn't announce itself, that waits for a quiet moment, a warm room, a Christmas Eve when you are 16 years old and alone and have just received a letter from your dead mother. Copper put his nose against Eli's wrist. Just that. Just his cold nose and his warm breath. Eli lowered his hands, looked at the dog. All right, he said. Copper looked back, patient, brown-eyed, absolutely certain. Eli picked up his spoon and finished his porridge. Because that was what you did. You received the grief that was yours to receive. You gave it the moment it deserved. And then you continued. That was what she had taught him. By example, by letters, by drawings, by a lifetime of continuing. December 26th, 2 days after Christmas. The man who arrived at the dugout that afternoon was not someone Eli had seen before. Old. 70, maybe the kind of old that comes from decades of outdoor work. The skin hardened and creased, the eyes still sharp. He wore a coat that had been repaired so many times it was now more repair than original coat. He drove a single-horse wagon with the unhurried pace of someone who had been traveling long distances for a long time and had made peace with the length of everything. He stopped at the base of the hill, looked up at the hillside, at the thin chimney smoke, at the south-facing entrance. Boy, he said. Sir, Eli said. Jeb Coulter. I've been running trade routes through this territory since before you were born. He looked at the hillside again. I've seen 23 Dakota winters. Some of them tried to kill me. 2 of them almost did. Eli waited. There's a storm coming, Coulter said. I've watched weather in this territory long enough to know the signs. Sky pressure, wind patterns, temperature drop rate. He looked directly at Eli. This one is going to be severe. 40 below, maybe colder. Wind you won't believe until you see it. It's going to be dangerous. When? Eli said. 3 days, maybe less. I see. There are families in this settlement with good solid houses who are going to struggle, Coulter said. You're a boy alone in a structure dug into a hillside. He paused, not unkindly. Get to one of the established homesteads before it hits. There's still time. Eli looked at the dugout entrance, at the solid cottonwood door 4 inches thick, at the hillside pressing in from 3 sides, holding heat, holding steady. Thank you, he said, for the warning. You'll go. I'll prepare. Coulter studied him for a long moment. Your choice, he said, but I gave you warning. That's on the record. He drove on. Eli went inside and took inventory. Methodical, item by item. The way his mother had always done inventory, not anxiously, but with the precision of someone who believes that knowing the exact state of things is the first step toward managing them. 37 pounds of cornmeal, 43 pounds of salt pork, 28 pounds of dried beans, 12 pounds of rice, 6 pounds of coffee, 3 gallons of kerosene, 58 pounds of winter squash from the cellar hole dug behind the dugout, 18 gallons of water in barrels, 3/4 of a cord of wood more than the winter had asked for, so far more than enough. He wrote the numbers in his record book. Then he inspected the chimney tunnel, cleared a small accumulation of ash from the clay lining, checked the stovepipe connections, checked the door hinges, checked the roof when outside, climbed the hill, pressed his hands against the sod surface and felt its solidity, felt the weight of frozen earth layered above the timbers. Solid, sound. He came back inside. Copper was sitting in the middle of the floor looking at him with the expression of a dog who has been watching someone perform careful rituals and is waiting for them to finish. We're ready, Eli said. Copper's tail moved once. December 28th. Ernst came by in the afternoon. He'd been to Yankton, had filed documentation with the land office, had included Eli's construction records, Cecilia's co-signature, a detailed technical description of the dugout and its operation. The hearing is still February 3rd, Ernst said, but I've submitted everything we have. He sat down at the small table. Also, I've been talking to other homesteaders about what you've built, what it's done this winter. He opened his notebook. I want to document everything properly. Temperature readings, wood consumption, construction, specifications. He looked up. Would you allow me to publish an account in the Dakota Free Press? Eli looked at him. You want to write about the dugout. I want to write about the engineering, Ernst said, about what your mother designed, about what works and why. He paused. Other families are struggling. They don't have to be. If I document this correctly. Yes, Eli said. Ernst looked up. Just yes. My mother made the drawings so someone could use them, Eli said. She didn't make them for me specifically. She made them because the knowledge was important. He looked at the drawing on the wall. Yes, write about it. Write about her. Ernst wrote that down, then looked at the sky through the small south window. The weather is changing, he said. I know, Eli said. Coulter came by. He's been right before, Ernst said. About bad ones. He stood. You're certain you'll be all right here? More certain than I am about anything else, Eli said. Ernst looked at him for a long moment. Then he put on his coat. I'll come by after, he said. Whatever after looks like. He left. The storm hit on the night of December 29th, 2 in the morning. Not gradually. Not with the courtesy of building slowly. It arrived all at once, a wall of wind and cold that hit the hillside like something physical, like a force that had been accumulating somewhere north of Canada for weeks and had finally arrived at its destination. The dugout shuddered, just once, a single shiver like a living thing acknowledging something large. Then it held. Eli woke to a sound he'd never heard before. Wind in all his 16 years of winters, but not wind like this. This was different. This was the sound of weather that didn't know you were there and wouldn't care if it did. This was the sound of a world that was not in any meaningful sense aware of human beings. He lit the lamp. 62 degrees inside. The temperature had dropped some, the wind pulling at microscopic gaps, reaching for heat through every possible road. But 62, not 40, not 30, 62. He fed the stove. Small pieces, slow burn. Let the thermal mass do its work. Watch the temperature climb back towards 64. Copper was awake, sitting up. His ears were tracking the wind the way dog ears track sound, rotating, slightly reading the frequency. Not afraid, just alert, paying attention. It's all right, Eli said. Copper's ears relaxed. Then at 2:47 in the morning, Eli would remember this because he had been watching the clock. That particular habit of his mother's, always know the time, always know the time. Copper stood up. Not gradually, not with the slow stretching of a dog waking. He was on his feet in one motion, fully alert, his nose working, his body pointed at the door. And then he made a sound Eli had heard exactly once before. A low, soft sound. Not quite a growl, more like a word in a language Eli was still learning. A sound that meant something needs attention outside this door, and I am the one who will address it. Copper! The dog looked at him, back at the door, back at him, and then very clearly, unmistakably pawed at the door. Eli was on his feet. He put on his coat, his hat, his boots. Every layer. Because outside was not a place you walked into unprepared that night. Outside was a place that would punish any gap in your protection within minutes. He opened the door. The cold hit him like a physical impact, the wind like a wall, and through it, through the screaming white dark of the blizzard, a sound, thin, high, almost swallowed by the wind, a child crying. Yeah, he knew the Bjornsson claim, 200 yards east, maybe a little more. Arvid and Marta Bjornsson, a young couple from Minnesota, their son Niels, who was 3 years old, and had an enormous laugh for a small boy. Eli had spoken to Marta twice at the general store. She'd been kind, had commented on Copper's color, said he looked like autumn. Their claim shack was thin. He had noticed this, had thought it, had not said it, because you don't tell a man his house is inadequate when he's built it with his own hands. But he had thought it. Copper was already moving. Into the wind, into the dark. Not running the snow was too deep, the wind too strong for running, but moving with the absolute purposeful certainty of a dog who knows where he's going. Eli followed. The cold was extraordinary. Not cold like he'd experienced before. This was cold that operated as a system wind driving temperature into every gap into the space between collar and neck, between boot top and trouser leg. Cold that was actively searching for you. He kept his head down, kept moving. 200 yards felt like a mile. He heard Copper first heard the dog bark short and sharp cutting through the wind. Followed the sound. Found them 40 yards from where the Bjornsson shack had been. Marta on her knees in the snow holding Niels inside her coat. Arvid behind her, one hand on her shoulder, the other arm raised against the wind, completely disoriented. The shack's roof had gone in the first hour of the storm. They'd come out into the dark and immediately lost their bearings. 40 yards from safety. In a whiteout, 40 yards is infinite. Copper was circling them. Small, tight circles. The way dogs circle things they intend to keep. This way, Eli said. He took Marta's arm. She grabbed on. Arvid grabbed her. Copper moved ahead, cutting the wind, showing the direction. Back to the hillside. Back to the door. Inside. 5 people and 1 dog and 192 square feet. Marta sat on the bed with Niels pressed against her. The boy had stopped crying, was looking around the dugout with the enormous round eyes of a child who has been terrified and is now very, very interested in being warm. Arvid stood near the stove, not speaking, just standing near the heat, getting it back. Copper lay near the door. His left front paw was held slightly off the floor. He'd wrenched it on something in the dark, a hidden rock under the snow maybe. Not broken, but sore. Eli crouched next to him, ran his hands along the leg. Nothing cracked, just bruised. Marta watched this. "Is he all right?" she said. "He'll be fine," Eli said. "He found us," Marta said. "I couldn't see anything. I couldn't hear anything except the wind." And then the dog was just there. She looked at Copper. Copper looked back at her. His tail moved, slow and tired. "He always knows where to go," Eli said. Outside, the storm screamed and raged and pressed against the hillside with everything it had. Inside, the temperature held at 61 degrees. The thermal mass his mother had designed, the 3 tons of earth above the double-sawed walls on the side, The hillside pressing in from behind, held against the worst storm in a decade. Did exactly what she had drawn it to do. Held. Niels fell asleep on the bed between his parents at 4 in the morning. Arvid looked at the earthen ceiling, at the solid timbers, at the sod walls with their 2-foot thickness. "How warm is it in here?" he said. 61 degrees, Eli said. Arvid was quiet. "My house is gone," he said. "I know." "The whole roof, just gone." "I know." A long pause. "You'll help me build a new one," Arvid said. Eli looked at him. "Not the same kind," Eli said. "No," Arvid said. "Not the same kind." The storm ran for 3 days and 3 nights. 72 hours of wind and cold and white. Outside the dugout, the temperature reached 42 below zero on the second night. Eli knew this because he had hung a thermometer near the door frame mounted so he could read it by opening the door an inch without going out. Inside, 56 degrees. No additional wood since the second day their supply was carefully rationed, the stove running on small pieces, the thermal mass doing the majority of the work. 56 degrees with 5 people and a dog and 42 below zero. Niels had decided the dugout was the best place he'd ever been. He spent the daylight hours investigating the shelves cut into the back wall, discovering that Copper would play a game involving a small piece of rope if you were patient about initiating it, and requesting the same story from his mother approximately every 3 hours, with the persistence of a person who has recently discovered that he has preferences. Marta, whose composure had a quality Eli recognized, the particular steadiness of a woman who has already made peace with the fact that being afraid doesn't help, kept the small household organized with quiet efficiency. Rationed the cornmeal, melted snow for water, organized the sleeping arrangements so that Arvid was nearest the wall, and Nils was between them, and the warmth came from the bodies in the stove and the earth in a layered system that worked. She had understood the system within a few hours of being inside it. Arvid watched her understand it. On the second day, he asked Eli, "Your mother designed all of this?" "Yes." "From drawings?" "From drawings, and from what her father built in Sweden." Arvid was quiet. "She designed something that saved my wife and my son," he said. Eli didn't answer, because there wasn't an answer to that. Or there was, but it was too big to say in a dugout in a blizzard in 1876. He just nodded. And the earth held, as it had been holding for 10,000 years, as it would keep holding steady and impartial and warm, long after all of them were gone. On the morning of the third day, the wind stopped. Just stopped. The silence was extraordinary. The kind of silence you only hear after something very loud has ended. The silence of absence. Eli opened the door. Snow drifts 8 to 10 feet high. The entire landscape transformed. The Missouri bottomlands below invisible under white. The settlement, what he could see of it from the hillside, showing the dark gaps of damaged structures. A roof gone here, a wall pushed in there. The thermometer outside read 42 below zero. Inside the dugout, 56 degrees. He stood in the doorway for a long moment. Behind him, Marta was waking Niels. Copper was at Eli's heel, looking out at the transformed world with bright eyes. His paw was better. Almost entirely. Eli looked out at the silent, frozen, enormous land. He thought about his mother, about a woman who had spent years drawing this structure in the margins of her life, refining it, returning to it, preparing it. For a moment she knew was coming and hoped would never come. She had drawn it so carefully, so precisely, so lovingly. And here it was, standing, while the world outside had done its worst. He reached into his coat and touched the folded paper against his sternum. "The earth will hold you the way I cannot anymore." It had. It did. Part 3. Justice comes to every door in its own time. 4 people died. That was the number. When the counting was done, when the settlement had dug itself out and taken stock and stood in the frozen aftermath of the worst storm in a decade and tried to understand what had just happened. 4 people. 2 elderly men on the eastern edge of the territory. Their wood had run out on the second night. The cold had done the rest. Quietly, without drama. The way cold always does its worst work, not loudly, not with warning, just a slow and patient subtraction of warmth until there is nothing left to subtract. One young couple, disoriented in the whiteout, found 40 yards from their own door. 40 yards, which is nothing, which is everything when you cannot see and cannot feel your hands, and the wind is pulling sound out of the air before it reaches you. 4 people. And in a dugout carved 8 feet into a south-facing hillside above the Missouri bottomlands, 1 boy, 1 dog, 1 young family with a 3-year-old son who had spent 3 days playing with a piece of rope and requesting the same story every few hours. All alive, all warm. The settlement dug out slowly. Not all at once, not with the coordinated energy of a community that has processed what happened and decided how to respond. It dug out the way shaken things dig out incrementally. 1 door at a time, 1 snowdrift at a time. Eli was outside by mid-morning of the first day, a shovel in his hands. Copper moving through the snow beside him, favoring the left front paw still, but moving, always moving, because Copper did not believe in staying still when there was world to investigate. He went to the Folvick property first, because it was closest, because he'd seen the damage from the hillside, a section of the north wall, missing boards torn away by the wind. Gunnar Folvick opened the door before Eli knocked. The man looked 10 years older than he had before the storm. His face was a map of 3 days of fear, the chapped skin, the dark circles, the particular hollowness of eyes that have not slept. Behind him, Eli could see his wife and 2 sons, all wrapped in everything they owned, all alive. The interior of the house was cold in the way that timber buildings get cold when they've been losing heat for 72 hours. A deep, settled chill that a single stove could not quickly correct. "You're all right," Eli said. "Barely," Gunnar said. A pause. "We burned through all the cordwood," Gunnar said. "Then the furniture. Then—" He stopped. 3 chairs, gone. My wife's rocking chair, gone." Eli looked at the damaged north wall, at the frozen gap where the wind had found its way in. "Can I help with the repair?" Eli said. Gunnar looked at him for a long moment. Not the way he'd looked at him in November. Not with that particular mixture of pity and dismissal. Something different now. Something that was having difficulty finding the right form. "Come inside," Gunnar said. They worked on the wall for 2 hours. Gunnar's sons helped. Strong boys 19 and 22 with their father's hands and their father's silence when they were focused on something. When it was done, when the gap was closed and the wind was shut out, and the stove was finally making progress against the chill, Gunnar went to a shelf in the corner and took down something wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it on the table. A hammer. Old. The handle worn smooth with decades of use. The head showing the particular polish of a tool that has been used correctly for a very long time. On the handle, carved deep into the wood, a name in Norwegian. H. Folvick, his grandfather's. The kind of object that crosses an ocean in the bottom of a trunk because some things are not left behind. Gunnar picked it up, held it out to Eli. "My grandfather built into hillsides," Gunnar said. "In Hordaland. I watched him as a boy. I told you I'd forgotten." He looked at the hammer. "You didn't forget. You remembered something none of us remembered to keep." He pushed the hammer forward. "Take it." Eli looked at the hammer. "That's your family's," he said. "Yes," Gunnar said. "And I'm giving it to someone who'll use it right." A pause, the length of a man swallowing something difficult. "Your father would have understood this. A man who builds things that last." He looked at Eli directly. "Mine did. So would yours." Eli took the hammer, the weight of it, the smoothness of the handle, the way it sat in his palm like it had been balanced for exactly this. He didn't say anything, because there was nothing to say that wouldn't have been smaller than the moment. Gunnar's wife brought coffee. They drank it around the table. Warm enough, finally. The stove catching up. Outside, the frozen world was slowly, reluctantly beginning to accept that the storm was over. Dietrich Hamann came to Eli, not the other way around. He appeared at the dugout on the 5th day after the storm, January 3rd, 1877, and knocked on the cottonwood door with the precise knock of a man who has decided to do something and is doing it correctly. Eli opened the door. Dietrich stood there in his mason's coat, the one he wore when he was working. His expression was the expression of a man who is about to say something he has rehearsed and is hoping won't be as difficult as he's been expecting. "I have questions," Dietrich said. "Come in," Eli said. Dietrich came in. He didn't sit. He stood in the center of the space and looked around the way he'd always looked at structures professionally. seeing the angles, reading the load paths, understanding the decisions. The air gap, he said, 2 feet between the walls, dead airspace. Yes, your mother specified this. In the drawings, yes. The value of it is the air doesn't move. Still, air is a poor conductor. That's what Ernst says. That's what the drawings assumed. Dietrich walked to the wall, pressed his palm flat against the sod surface, held it there. Still warm, he said. 5 days after the worst storm in 10 years. It holds, Eli said. Dietrich turned, looked at him. I was an apprentice for 4 years, he said. I told you that. I remember. My master in Hamburg, he was the best mason in the city. He knew stone the way other men know language. Every property, every behavior. Dietrich was quiet for a moment. He never talked about earth. Earth was beneath the craft, something you built on top of, not with. He looked at the drawing on the wall, Astrid's sketch pinned there since the first day. Walked to it, stood in front of it the way you stand in front of something that requires full attention. A woman drew this, he said. My mother, Eli said, before she died. Years before. Dietrich studied the lines, the dimensions, the annotations in 2 different inks showing the revisions over time. The precise calculation of roof load in the margin, the calculation he demanded to see on the 3rd day of construction, the one that had been correct. She understood materials, Dietrich said quietly, better than most men I trained under. He turned from the drawing. I added an interior sod wall to my stone house, he said. Last week, before the storm hit, 12 inches thick, 6-inch air gap between the sod and the stone. He paused. The condensation problem, the moisture on the stone, it's gone. The interior temperature held 4 degrees higher than before. Eli looked at him. Good, Eli said. I learned that from watching you, Dietrich said. From watching what you built. He met Eli's eyes. I should have watched sooner, instead of talking. He picked up his coat from where he'd set it on the chair. If you ever need a mason, he said, for any structure you're building, I'll come. No charge for the first one. He left. Copper watched him go, then looked at Eli with an expression that on a human face would have been called, I told you it would work out. February 3rd came like a sentence being read aloud. Roland Voss. The Yankton Land Board met in a low building on the Main Street wood floors. A long table, 3 men who decided territorial land disputes with the weary authority of people who have seen every version of this particular argument before and expect to see it again. Eli sat on one side. Ernst beside him. Cecilia Pratt beside Ernst, straight-backed, her hands folded on the table, radiating the particular calm of a woman who has decided the outcome already and is waiting for everyone else to catch up. Roland sat on the other side with Cresswell. Cresswell was a skilled lawyer. Eli could see that immediately. The kind of skill that comes from knowing which details to emphasize and which to make disappear from understanding that legal arguments are not always about truth, but about the careful construction of a persuasive reality. His argument was clean, well-organized. E. Lindqvist had filed as a minor without legal guardianship. The Homestead Act required adult claimants. The claim was therefore defective. Then Ernst stood up. And Ernst was something else entirely. He was the kind of speaker who didn't perform, who simply laid things out one after another with the quiet precision of a man who has thought very carefully about what he's going to say and has no interest in wasting anyone's time. He presented Cecilia's co-signed documentation of the construction. Every date, every material cost, every temperature reading since December 4th. He presented the testimony of Arvid Bjornsson, written signed witness detailing how the dugout had sheltered his family through the storm, how his son had been alive on January 1st because of what Eli had built. He cited territorial precedents in which land boards had ruled in favor of minors who had established physical residency and demonstrated substantial improvement of land, not a single clean case, but a pattern of decisions that pointed in the same direction. He presented the technical description of the structure, its specifications, its performance through the December storm. And then last he unfolded a piece of paper, a copy of Astrid's drawing. He held it up. This structure, Ernst said, was not designed by a 16-year-old boy improvising from necessity. It was designed by Astrid Lindqvist, a Swedish immigrant woman who understood thermal mass drainage principles and earthen construction from her family's traditions. who spent years refining this design, who prepared it for her son because she understood that he would need it and she would not be there. He set the paper on the table. The claimant did not act recklessly. He built from a design that was sound before he touched the first shovel. He executed that design correctly. He has maintained the claim continuously and improved the land substantially. He has in fact demonstrated more competence in the management of this land than most adult claimants in this territory. He sat down. The three board members looked at the drawings, at the documentation, at Cecilia's co-signature on every page. Cresswell made his counterargument. It was technically competent. It was also somehow less than what had come before. Because technical competence without human truth has a particular hollowness, and everyone in that room could feel it. The board deliberated for 40 minutes. Eli sat in the hall outside and waited. Copper was not allowed in the building. He sat outside the front door, visible through the window, doing the thing he did when he was waiting a slow, patient survey of everything in his field of vision, absolutely certain that whatever was happening would resolve itself correctly. Ernst sat next to Eli. "How does it look?" Eli said. "Good," Ernst said. Honest answer. Ernst thought. "Good," he said again. "Honestly." Cecilia was at the end of the bench. She had brought her knitting. She was working through the weight with the focus of someone who has decided that anxiety is not a useful expenditure of energy and has found a more productive alternative. Roland Voss stood by the window. He hadn't looked at Eli since they'd entered the building, and then the door opened. The board member in the center read the decision aloud. Straightforward, no drama. The claim was valid. While the legal question of age was not without complexity, the board found that the claimant had demonstrated continuous residency and substantial material improvement of the land, and that equity principles supported maintaining the claim. E. Linkvist's homestead on quarter section 7 South Hillside was confirmed. Cresswell gathered his papers without expression. That was the professional thing to do. Roland turned from the window. For a moment, just a moment, he looked at Eli. Not with anger. That was the surprising thing. Not with the hot-faced resentment Eli had half expected. With something harder to name. Something that might have been recognition. The look of a man who has been trying to convince himself that something isn't real and has just received confirmation that it is. He turned. Walked out of the building. Through the window, Eli watched him go to his horse. Mount. Ride east along the Yankton Road. He did not look back. Eli would never see him again. Outside, Copper was waiting at the bottom of the steps. Tail moving, eyes bright, absolutely certain that everything had worked out exactly as it should. Eli put his hand on the dog's head. Stood there for a moment in the February cold, cold but manageable cold. Ordinary cold, the kind he had learned to live inside without thinking about it much and let the decision settle into him. The land was his. His mother's design built on his mother's chosen hillside kept in his mother's name. That was the thing Roland had never understood, had never been able to understand. This was never just about the land. That left one more door to knock on. Cecilia Pratt came to the dugout in March. Not alone. She brought her granddaughter Clara, 24, newly married to a man named Thomas Reed, who had recently filed a claim 20 miles south along the river. They'd come from Ohio with good intentions and insufficient experience, and were already beginning to understand that Dakota winters operated on a different scale than anything they'd encountered before. Clara was the kind of young woman who asked questions before making statements, which Eli recognized immediately as a quality that would serve her well out here. Cecilia sat in the chair by the stove. Copper put his head in her lap as he always did now. He had decided sometime in December that Cecilia Pratt was one of his people, and he treated this as a settled fact that required no further discussion. Clara sat at the table and looked at Astrid's drawing on the wall with the focused attention of someone reading something important for the first time. Thomas Reed stood near the entrance, hands in his pockets, studying the double-sod wall construction with the expression of a man doing calculations. "You'd teach them," Cecilia said. "Yes," Eli said. "What will you charge?" "Nothing." Cecilia looked at him. "Your mother," she said, "would have charged them. She would have understood that knowledge has value, that charging for it doesn't diminish the giving, it acknowledges what's being given." Eli was quiet. "She would have wanted her design to sustain you," Cecilia said. "Not just keep you warm, sustain you. Build something that lasts." A pause long enough to be felt. $5 per consultation, Eli said. Cecilia nodded. Once. Satisfied. Clara had turned from the drawing. Your mother drew this, she said. Yes. It's very precise. She was very precise. Where did she learn it? And Eli told her. The whole story. Dalarna, Sweden. Halvard, the grandfather who built into hillsides. 3 winters survived while neighbors struggled. A girl who watched and asked questions and drew pictures in the margins of her schoolbooks. Decades of refinement. An ocean crossed. A new country. A life built from the beginning. A marriage. A son. A death that came too soon. A Bible with a spine full of money and a paper with drawings and a letter written in 2 languages because she needed to be absolutely certain he could read it. Clara listened to all of it. Then she looked at the drawing again. She trusted you to finish it, Clara said. She did, Eli said. Did you know that before you came here, did you know she trusted you that much? Eli thought about this, really thought about it. No, he said. I think that's what the letter was for, to tell me when she couldn't tell me in person anymore. Clara nodded slowly. Outside March was beginning its slow argument with winter. Cold still, but the particular cold of a season losing its conviction, a defensive cold, not an aggressive one. Thomas Reed cleared his throat. I'd like to start as soon as the ground is workable, he said. For the construction. April, Eli said. Maybe late March if the thaw comes early. And you'll show us everything. Everything she drew, everything I learned building it, everything Ernst documented. Eli paused. It's not complicated. It just requires paying attention to what's already there. Thomas nodded. Copper lifted his head from Cecilia's lap, looked at Thomas, made his assessment, wagged his tail. Good enough. Ernst's article ran in the Dakota Free Press on January 18, 1877. The headline was not dramatic. Ernst was not a dramatic man. It read, a thermally efficient dwelling for prairie settlement methods, materials, and results. Temperature comparisons, wood consumption rates, construction costs, the December storm data. All of it laid out in Ernst's careful, precise prose, the kind of writing that builds its case, the way a good structure is built, one course at a time, nothing wasted, everything earning its place. At the end of the article, 2 paragraphs. Not technical. The design described in this account was not originated by the 16-year-old boy who executed it, though he executed it with uncommon skill. It was originated by Astrid Lindqvist, née Svensdotter of Dalarna, Sweden, and later Mankato, Minnesota, who died of typhoid fever on September 14, 1876, at the age of 38. Mrs. Lindqvist spent years developing and refining this design drawing from her grandfather's construction methods and her own careful observation of how earthen mass behaves across seasons. She left her work to her son with the faith that he would complete it. This account is a record of her design working exactly as she intended it to work. The credit belongs to her. Eli read this sitting at his table in the dugout. Read it twice, then set the newspaper down. Outside, January was doing what January does, pressing in cold and relentless and committed. Inside, 58 degrees, no morning fire yet. He reached into his coat and took out the paper. Folded many times now, the creases worn soft with handling, the ink beginning to show the faint blur of paper that has been folded and unfolded many hundreds of times. He unfolded it. Read it one more time. Trust it. Trust yourself. I already do. He thought about her for a long while. The shape of her, the way she'd moved through rooms efficiently, without wasted motion, the way she did everything. The way she'd looked at problems not as obstacles, but as questions that hadn't been answered yet. Not this won't work, but what would make this work? He thought about the drawings she'd made over years, the ink in different colors where she'd returned to revise, the margins crowded with calculations, building something perfect in her mind long before there was land to build it on, building it for him, for a future she could see clearly but wouldn't be part of, that he thought was love in its most precise form, not the kind that announces itself, not the kind that requires an audience or a response, the kind that works quietly in the margins of a life year after year, that prepares and plans and arranges and trusts, and finally at the last possible moment lets go. The hardest kind, the most real kind. The article was reprinted in Minnesota, then Wisconsin, then Illinois. By February, letters were arriving at the Dakota Free Press addressed to the boy who built the warm house and to the family of the Swedish woman who designed it. Dobbs at the general store sorted them with his usual expression of terminal reluctance, but he sorted them carefully, and he handed them to Eli without commentary, which was for Dobbs a meaningful form of respect. Most letters ask questions about construction, about materials, about whether the design worked in different soil conditions and different climates on flat ground versus hillsides. Some letters said other things. A woman in Wisconsin wrote, "I lost my husband in the winter of 1872. I've been trying to keep the farm alone since then, and the cost of wood is making it impossible. If a 16-year-old boy could build what you built, I believe I could build it too. Would you send me the drawings?" Eli sat with that letter for a long time. Then he made a copy of Astrid's drawing. Precise, every dimension, every annotation, every note she'd made in the margins. He wrote a short letter explaining the key principles and sent both together. He made 31 more copies that winter. Sent them all. Mim. By spring of 1877, 23 families had come to him directly for consultations. Eli charged $5 each, because Cecilia had been right, because his mother would have known her knowledge had value, and charging for it was not greed, but acknowledgement. Each consultation was different. Each family had different land, different soil conditions, different hillside configurations, or the absence of them, different budgets, different family sizes. He adapted the design to each situation, staying true to the principles: thermal, mass double wall construction, proper drainage, natural draft, and adjusting everything else. Not one of the resulting structures failed. Not one family in a Lindqvist design structure lost a member to cold or fuel shortage that winter or the winter after. Ernst documented everything in a notebook that was growing thick with data temperature records from 14 structures across 3 counties, wood consumption comparisons, construction cost, breakdowns. In April of 1877, he proposed turning it into a published handbook. Practical, clear, accessible to someone with no formal education, which was the intended audience. "I want to put your mother's name on it," Ernst said. "Yes," Eli said. "As the originating designer." "Yes." "And yours as the builder who proved it worked." Eli thought about this for a moment. "And yours as the documenter," he said. "All 3 names, all 3 parts matter." Ernst looked at him. "She would have wanted the credit to be complete," Eli said. Ernst wrote that down and didn't argue. The handbook, Practical Earth-Sheltered Construction for Prairie Settlement, by A. Lindqvist, E. Lindqvist, and E. Halverson, was published in the fall of 1879. It went through 3 printings. Gunnar Folvik rebuilt in the spring of 1877. Not the timber frame, not the house that stood exposed on flat ground taking every wind from the north. He dug 2 feet into the northern slope of his property, banked earth against 3 walls, built a sod-insulated roof over the main room, cut his wood consumption in half by the following winter. He never publicly said where the idea had come from, which was fine, because everyone knew. And one day in May, while Eli was outside splitting kindling in the morning light, Gunnar appeared at the fence line carrying something wrapped in cloth. He set it on the post. Eli unwrapped it. A small carving, wood pine by the smell of it, freshly worked. A dog, a retriever recognizable by the feathered tail and the particular set of the ears, rough-hewn but unmistakable, the work of someone who knew what they were trying to make and had made it. Eli looked at it, looked at Gunnar. "My oldest son carved it," Gunnar said. "He has the skill. His grandfather did too." A pause. "He wanted to thank the dog." Eli almost smiled. "The dog is right here," Eli said. Gunnar looked at Copper, who had come to stand at Eli's knee and was now examining the carving with his nose. "I know." He put his hat on. "Tell him he's the reason my grandson will grow up knowing his grandfather." He walked back toward his property. Copper sniffed the carving thoroughly. Approved. Watchiem. The summer of 1877 was hot, in the way only Dakota summers are hot. A broad, pressing horizontal heat that had nowhere to go and no interest in being managed. Which raised a question no one had thought to ask. The dugout in summer. But the thermal mass worked in perfect reverse. The earth holding at 52 degrees while the outside temperature climbed to 90 to 100 on the worst days. The dugout stayed cool, not cold. cool. The kind of temperature that let you sleep at night without waking soaked through, that lets you work through the day without the accumulated exhaustion that the heat pressed into the people in timber frame houses. Families who had built earth-sheltered structures stopped talking exclusively about surviving winter. They started talking about living comfortably, year-round, which was Eli understood then what his mother had actually been designing for all along. Not just endurance, not just making it through the cold. A life that was livable in all its seasons, sustainable, human. She had been designing for dignity. The years pass the way years pass in a place that asks a great deal of you. Not quickly, not easily, but with the particular satisfaction of time spent doing work that matters. In 1878, 41 families in the territory had earth-sheltered structures based on the Lindqvist design. In 1879, the handbook reached homesteaders in Nebraska and Montana. By 1880, Ernst had documented temperature records from structures built in 3 different soil types and 2 different climate zones, and the performance held consistent across all of them. The principles were sound. They had always been sound. Astrid had known that before any of them. Eli proved up his homestead in November of 1881. He was 21 years old. He stood in Dobbs' land office. Dobbs still at his post, still wearing his expression of mild dissatisfaction with existence, and signed the papers that made the homestead legally and permanently his. Dobbs stamped the document, handed it across the counter. "You made it," Dobbs said. It was the most personal thing he had ever said to Eli. "Yes," Eli said. He walked out into the November cold with the papers in his hand and Copper beside him, and he stood in the road for a moment looking south toward the hillside. His mother's hillside, the one she had described in a sketch she'd drawn in Dalarna memories and refined over years in Minnesota and never lived to see. He folded the papers, put them in his coat, touched the worn paper at his sternum. Then he walked home. Cecilia Pratt died in the spring of 1888. She died in her own house in her own bed with her granddaughter Clara beside her. Warm. At 81 years old, she had been 69 when she first walked to Eli's excavation site and watched Copper lead her back to see what a stubborn boy was doing to a hillside. That was 12 years and a great many winters ago. Clara wrote to Eli after the funeral, told him that in the final weeks, Cecilia had talked often about that first winter, about the boy on the hillside who had refused every reasonable offer of help with the polite certainty of someone who understood something the rest of the world hadn't figured out yet. She said you reminded her of herself at 16, Clara wrote. She said she recognized the particular kind of stubbornness that knows it's right and doesn't need anyone to confirm it. She meant it as the highest compliment she knew how to give. Eli read this at the table in the dugout. The same table, the same chairs Wolf had helped him build from salvage wood in November 1876. Outside, spring was finally winning its argument with winter. The earth on the hillside was beginning to soften. New grass coming in at the south entrance, the same grass that came in every spring, the same patient green returning to the same warm ground. He thought about Cecilia, about a woman who had come to his excavation site, prepared to dismiss what she saw, and had instead seen something that changed her mind and had had the character to let her mind be changed. That was its own kind of courage, not the loud kind, not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind, which is harder. Copper died in December of 1883, not the hard way, the good way, which is the only grace available to dogs. He had been slowing for months, moving more carefully through the days, sleeping longer. The golden coat had gone silver at his muzzle, and around his eyes, softening his face into something that looked, if possible, even more certain of things than he had always looked. The eyes themselves hadn't changed, still brown, still carrying that absolute settled conviction that everything was going to resolve correctly. He went in the warmest corner of the dugout. The corner he had walked directly to on the very first night, December 4th, 1876, and had chosen without hesitation and never changed. The corner where the clay-lined chimney tunnel ran closest to the surface, where the thermal mass was highest, where the temperature held steadiest through the coldest nights. He had known from the first night exactly where to be, 9 years old, a full life lived with complete attention to the things that mattered, warmth and presence, and knowing where to go. Eli sat beside him for a long time after. Then he wrapped him in a piece of the original canvas from the roof construction, a piece he had kept folded in the trunk for years, for no reason he could have named at the time, in the way you keep things that feel like they might be needed later. He buried him outside the south entrance, the warm side, where the afternoon sun stayed longest in the winter months. He made a marker from a piece of cottonwood, carved into it copper. And below, because it was true, and because he wanted it recorded, he always knew where to go. The handbook went through 3 printings between 1879 and 1884. At some point that Eli could never precisely identify people in the territory, stopped calling it the Lindqvist design and started calling it simply the right way to build in this country, which was not fame exactly. It was better than fame. It was the absorption of a good idea into common understanding, which is what happens to correct things when they've been proven enough times. His mother had never been interested in credit. She had been interested in whether the thing worked. It worked. The letters kept coming, from Wisconsin, from Nebraska, from the Minnesota counties he'd left behind, from women managing farms alone after losing husbands, from families who had tried one winter in a timber frame house and were not willing to try a second, from young men, some of them not much older than he'd been in November 1876, standing at the edge of a claim with not enough money and not enough experience, and a winter coming. He answered every letter. He sent the drawings to anyone who asked. He charged $5 for in-person consultations as Cecilia had told him to, and he waived the fee when the family clearly couldn't pay it, as he suspected Cecilia would have told him to do that as well if she'd thought he needed telling. In the spring of 1884, Ernst Halverson accepted a teaching position at a college in Wisconsin. They said goodbye on a Tuesday morning, which was appropriate. Ernst was the kind of person for whom Tuesdays felt right. Not dramatic days, productive days. "You don't need me anymore," Ernst said, "if you ever did." "I needed you," Eli said. In February 1877. "You needed someone who could write a legal brief," Ernst said. "That could have been anyone." "It was you." Ernst looked at the hillside, at the dugout entrance, at the extended structure, 2 additional rooms, now skylights, improved ventilation. All of it built from the same principles as the original, all of it working as well as the original. "Your mother's design is in 47 land offices across 4 territories," Ernst said. "The handbook is being used as a reference document in settlement guides in 3 states. He looked at Eli. "She never got to see what she made." "No," Eli said. "You made sure it happened anyway?" A pause. "That's what the letter was for," Eli said. "She knew I would." Ernst put out his hand. Eli shook it. Copper, who had been lying in the morning sun near the entrance, lifted his head to watch Ernst walk away, then put it back down, satisfied. The dugout stood for 65 years. It was not demolished. It was not replaced. It simply returned over time as earthen structures due to the earth from which it had come. The sod walls slowly merged back into the hillside. The roof timbers, after 6 decades of faithfully holding 3 tons of earth, finally gave way to the patient pull of gravity and time. It collapsed in the spring of 1941. A group of engineers from the State University came out to look at the site. They had read about the Lindqvist structure in a historical monograph and were curious about its longevity and its thermal principles. They excavated the foundation area. They took soil temperatures at depth, 6 feet down in the dark, and the quiet undisturbed by anything that had happened on the surface above it for 65 years, 52 degrees Fahrenheit. The same temperature Ernst had recorded in December 1876. The same temperature Astrid had calculated in the margins of a drawing made years before her son was old enough to need it. Unchanged, patient, exactly as it had always been. There is a marker now on that hillside south of Yankton. Simple, not large. It reads, "This is the site of the Lindqvist earth-sheltered dwelling constructed November 1876. Designed by Astrid Lindqvist of Dalarna, Sweden. Built by her son Eli, age 16. The structure maintained interior temperatures of 52 to 65 degrees through the severe winter of 1876 to 1877. This design influenced dozens of earth-sheltered structures across Dakota Territory, Nebraska, and Montana, and contributed to the survival of many families during the difficult winters of the late 1870s and early 1880s. And below that, in smaller letters, added by a local historical society that understood which part of the story mattered most. The original design was created by a mother for her son. She did not live to see it built. he built it anyway. It worked exactly as she knew it would. Some things are like that. The love that prepares, the love that plans, the love that works quietly in the margins of a life drawing, revising, returning again and again to the same careful lines, so that when the cold comes, as the cold always comes, there is already something built to hold against it. Astrid Lindqvist never saw the dugout, but she built it. Every dimension, every angle, every note in the margin about checking the calculation twice, every revision in a different ink, every year of returning to the same drawing and making it a little more precise, a little more certain, a little more ready. She built it in the years before she needed to build it, in the time she had, with what she knew, and then she trusted the earth, the design, her son, mostly her son. Because that is what the deepest love does. It doesn't try to protect people from the cold. It gives them what they need to build something warm. And when the worst storm in a decade arrived with its 42 below and its 3 days of screaming wind and its 40 yards of whiteout that was infinite, the earth held, as she had always known it would, as she had designed it to, as it will keep holding steady and unchanged and patient 6 feet down in the dark, long after all of us are gone.